Can you hear that?
I can.
Oh, you can. All right, let me change this. Um, is it really that dark in here? Maybe I should turn some lights on. Right. Ah, that's better.
Ooh, cool. Is that the Halifax Harbor?
Yep.
Sweet. That's awesome.
Oh, there. Light from over there. And some light coming from there. Why is it so dark? I have to do a trick. Trick. Uh, are we recording?
We are. Actually,
Oh,
while you're doing that, maybe I shall do something here because I have been thinking about something for a long time that I haven't been able to do.
all right. I got your text.
Déjà? Okay, that's good. That's a sing song, yo. You can count on me like one, two, three, and I'll be there. 'Cause I know when I need it, I can count on you like four, three, two, and you'll be there. 'Cause that's what friends are supposed to do. Oh yeah. Do 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 do. Do 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 do. Do do do.
Awesome, cool. What food is that?
It is chicken.
It is a chicken. Okay, next time it's got to be a whole chicken. It is a chicken. Awesome. At first, I couldn't quite see what it was. I thought, oh, he's got some sort of kazoo.
Oh, a bird kazoo.
That's totally cool.
All right, I got my coffee.
I don't know why the light is just terrible in here. Maybe I need to get a new light.
Hmm.
Get get a light for everything. So here I am in front of the window. But that is what I see outside my window. That's why I put that in the background.
Awesome.
So if I'm standing there, oh, now you can't see me at all. That's what you would see.
Oh, that gave me a little bit of nostalgia. I've seen a little bit of Nova Scotia.
Oats, man.
Hmm.
So what is on our agenda today?
Well, I had a couple questions if you wanted to start there, and then we could maybe use that to get comfortable and jump off into stuff.
Sure, sounds good.
Okay. Um, the first one being, maybe we'll start with this one. What is a um, socialist libertarian?
All right. That's a great question to start.
Actually,
Um,
before you jump off, could I actually get you to do what is a socialist and what is a libertarian and what is a socialist libertarian?
oh, wow, that'll take me like 5 hours.
Oh, okay. Well, maybe one will
But
do then.
well, okay, no, like that we can simplify it and try and make it more accessible to folks. I think people tend to want to gravitate towards simplistic definitions of both of those terms. Um, and maybe that's a place to start is to um, let people know what I think is the generally incorrect assumption about both of those terms. That libertarianism in its simplest form, is focus on the individual, and socialism, in its simplest form, is focus on the community. And the community, that's where the word communism comes from. Now, people often make that wrong assumption that communism and socialism are the same things. They're not. Uh, there's a very wide spectrum of all of these things. Um, and in fact, I am now at a place where I feel as though all of these terms are somewhat meaningless at this point because it doesn't so much matter what the actual definitions of the words are, because the listener or the reader has a huge layer of what they think it is. And so you have to take in into account what is the general feelings about it and the specific feelings about it.
Like it's filtered through ideology, you mean, or filtered through culture?
Through
I mean,
culture and their own understanding. Like if you look it up in the dictionary, socialism would be defined in such a way that it's that the ability to manufacture, the production, the means of production, that's the word used. The means of production are controlled by the many. Now, see, there's where it gets into the different layers. Is some think, well, it's the means of production controlled by a tiny group in the government, whereas some more on the Marxist side of it is it's control of the means of production by all of the workers across the board. So you see how that's a very, very wide spectrum from one end to the other. And then, of course, you look at a capitalist system and go, well, wait a second, isn't it a tiny group that it controls every board of directors for every company? And are you a democratic participant in the workplace that you work? No, not at all. The people, the board of directors, they make the decisions. You can argue with your boss. You can create a union. You can try to negotiate better terms, but ultimately, it is a capitalist enterprise, and the owners make the decisions. That's the final, that's the final consideration, is the owners.
hmm.
So, anyways, I've gone on a few tangents here.
Well,
Um,
even in that, there's like, I'm like, oh man, okay. It's hard to get a handle. I mean, obviously, you'd have to do some reading to figure that all out, or I would, sorry, or people, I or people like me would have to do some reading on that.
well, that's a great thing. I think a lot of people should do a lot of reading about all of these terms. What I see is people basically don't have a full understanding of any of these terms. And I'll even include myself in that um, the terms are fluid and changing. And if in any discussion, I can't be 100% sure what the other person thinks that term means.
Right.
So if they're thinking it means something completely different, it's really hard to have a productive conversation with that
Hmm.
person when your starting point is completely different. And of course, it's a well-known strategy on the conservative side of the spectrum, or let's call it the status quo side of the spectrum. In particular, in North America, everything on the socialist side of the spectrum is colored by like 80 years worth of Cold War antagonism with Russia. It's the USSR, the Union of Soviet Socialist Republics. So that drop that word socialist in there, and you got to read a lot of American history to find out that that's a very common smear. Just say, we don't want to discuss that, so you're a communist.
Right. So it's kind of like I'm gonna relate it back to personalities and stuff, because that we sort of went in that direction last week, or I tried to finish with that one a little bit last time. So it's kind of like saying oh, remember that person that did that to me like last year? They were socialist. They were bad. And now I have this vision of socialism being like within the spectrum of that 100-year period or whatever, being like,
Yeah.
ah, these guys, we don't want that in our country, or to live our life by. Is that kind of what you were? Is that
Oh,
relating
definitely.
to that accurate?
Absolutely. Socialism as a concept in North America in particular has had a bad name for a long time. You have to dig through the history in particular of the United States of America, that go to any syllabus of any university of the last 80 years in the United States of America, you will find almost zero courses that look into Marxist literature or socialist literature or anything of that nature. It was considered taboo to the point of your neighbors threatening to kill you if you had ideas that they deemed as communist, that they would very much threaten to hurt you. And so that is the history of socialism in the United States. It just doesn't exist. So in the United States of America, and a lot in Canada as well, there's just a very, very limited understanding of what it is.
Hmm.
And in fact, when you really dig into it, you go, well, when was socialism invented in the first place? Socialism came on the heels of capitalism. It didn't exist before capitalism exists. In fact, socialism always exists when you have capitalism, and that's all it is. Socialism is just the shadow of capitalism. It is those who are willing to be critical of capitalism and try to make maybe capitalism better, or just make community as a whole better.
Hmm.
And capitalists find that threatening. You're threatening the capitalist system by suggesting, you know what, maybe capitalism works a lot better when you guarantee health care to all of your citizens, because when you have guaranteed health care for all of your citizens, there's a certain level of health in your society, which makes them more able to participate in a free capitalist society. So
Hmm.
here's where I'm getting closer to what socialist libertarian is. If you really want a libertarian world to work correctly, the libertarian philosophy is that we're all rational human beings, that we'll all get along in the end if we all have freedom. Now, my argument to that is, well, you need a certain level of basics before you can have any freedom at all. People are not rational when they're desperate, when they're hungry, when they're poor, when they're unhealthy. So that my socialist side says, well, let's deal with all of that. Let's minimize all that, bring everyone up to a certain basic level. And then when you're at that basic level, then you're free to participate in a very libertarian society where we don't need a lot of bureaucratic managers to sort of hover over the details of every community. But if every community, everyone's at a certain level of comfort, I think there's a libertarian way to move forward from that.
Hmm. Okay.
Libertarians will always, though, say, oh, socialists, they're for big government, and that libertarians are for small government. And I reject that simplistic notion. And that's why I like to, it's also because these are considered polar opposites. So I say, wait a second. Yeah, I am part of the polar opposites. I'm a libertarian socialist. And people go, poof, like, well, how can you possibly be for big government and small government at the same time? That's not possible. Yes, it is. It is possible because it depends. It depends on the issue. The United States, the military of the United States is the largest government program on the planet. Yet libertarians are like, oh yeah, rah, 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 US military. I said, but I thought you were for small government.
Hmm.
And then you realize, oh, it's not that at all. It's something entirely different. But then when you talk about healthcare, you go, well, wait a second. What is guaranteed health care for all of your citizens? Is that a big government program or is that a simple government program? A government program that all they do is they pay the bills so that everyone can get to this level and they get out of the nitty gritty of like, oh yeah, you have to pay 20% of this particular kind of dental procedure and you have to pay 30% and your employer has, like in the States, it's crazy. They have like 150 different healthcare plans. It's insane.
Hmm.
They have no health care whatsoever. In fact, my argument is that the United States simply doesn't have any health care at all. To put it in their capitalist system, it's completely dysfunctional.
Hmm.
But anyways, I'm getting on a different topic here. I
Wow.
want
No.
to move that thing. See, every time I
Oh.
move my arm,
Yeah.
my thing, it's funny. All right, so hopefully I answered your question.
Yeah. Well, actually, I think it was more out of curiosity. Of course, it was out of curiosity. I wasn't trying to. Um, well, I don't know what I was going to not try to do, but but yeah, I was just curious. And the other thing that I'm trying to do and get better at is to not be afraid to uh, say that I don't know a lot about certain topics.
That's
And
awesome.
one of those things is politics, man, and like I understand the
Mm.
basics of socialism and the basics of libertarianism, um, but not in the intricacies of how it's affecting today's society. I understand some of the historical concepts, historical. Let's can I call it a reputation that these certain ideas have held?
Sure, that I think is an excellent word because it's not necessarily that the meanings of these words are necessarily true anymore, but they do gain a reputation, and those reputations tend to last, whether they're incorrect or not. So
Can I
reputation is an excellent word.
Can I try to dig a little deeper? Because I think the way that I try to understand concepts, it never seems to be like, oh, here's a word and here's a definition. I always have to gain that like base level foundation of things of being like, well, what purpose does a political ideology or train of thought like socialism, like why is it there? And I feel like historical context is so important to understand in regards to like, okay, well, we were all hunter gatherers at one point, and then someone decided, you know, oh, we need to help each other, so let's um, instead of killing you so that I can have the meat, I'm going to share the meat so that we can help each other and continue forward and increase our species. What I bad example, but um, I feel like I need to start there because whenever I start talking about these concepts, I'm just like, well, why? For example, I know that Jordan Peterson is a hot button topic, kind of like one of those Ben Shapiro hot button topics. But what I learned from him was the Pareto distribution, that regardless of economic or sorry of political thought, economic distribution will naturally curve towards a distribution where the majority of the resources go to a small portion of the people. Um,
Yeah.
what's your analysis of that in regards to socialism, Marxism? I actually don't know a heck of a lot about Marxism as well. I don't know. Maybe did you watch that debate with Jordan Peterson and there was another? It was a Marxist guy, scholar guy. I forget his name, but it doesn't matter. Anyways, um, would
Well,
you?
there are very few Marxist scholars, so I probably do know who it is. Maybe Richard Wolff. He's probably one of the most famous Marxists in the
Uh,
United States.
I think he was like Eastern European type
Oh,
of.
Slovak or
Yeah,
that guy.
yeah.
Oh, well, that guy's such a strange character. I really
He's
don't
good.
know where he lands on the political spectrum because I actually think he kind of doesn't land on any side in the political spectrum. I think he's just an intellectual who's constantly just debating these things.
Hmm.
But I don't have a great knowledge on him at all.
Okay.
And admittedly, I don't have a great knowledge on Jordan Peterson as well. I have a lot more knowledge about the world that surrounds Jordan Peterson because that has become something entirely on its own.
Mm.
Um, but what was the thing that you were going to mention that you said
The
that
Pareto distribution
yes
of wealth, and of course, I think
yes.
yeah, yeah.
Well, yeah, absolutely. In if you accept the system that we have, that is what it is designed to do. Here's another way of thinking about it right now. I think it's particularly clear right now that we're in this COVID-19 pandemic. And a whole bunch of people, servers, um, ushers, all these, big space places that are shut down. These are some of the lowest paid people in our society. However, when you to take all the lowest paid people, well, I'll try and do this with my fingers, all of these people, that's who we're talking about. Let's say all of these people, or at least these three, go down to nothing. How are they going to pay their rent? And then if they don't pay their rent, how is the landlord going to pay either the heat bill, the light bill, or the mortgage? Because a lot of landlords are people who speculate on land, and how are they going to pay the mortgage? And then that goes up to the bank. So what I'm talking about here is we actually live in a trickle up economy. You've
Mm.
got all these people at the bottom that are absolutely necessary that keep spending on the ideas that make people on rungs higher money. You can't be a successful landlord if there are no renters.
Right.
It's not a business you can get into.
Man,
You
this.
can't sell junk food if there's not fat people. I just had to say it that way. I was going to say it a different way, but I was like, what the hell? I'll say it the most offensive way as possible. Lottery tickets. If everyone was a millionaire, would you make money selling lottery tickets? Probably not. Like, oh, I get to win $1 million? I already have $1 million. Why am I just going to give you $2 a week for a almost zero chance of winning? But when there's poor people, yeah, that's a product they might consume.
Hmm.
So if that's what Jordan Peterson is talking about, if you also accept the system that we have, yeah, that is what it's designed to do. The rich are designed to get richer. We all learned this when we were a kid. We all played Monopoly.
Right. Yeah.
And once one player gets a certain advantage on all of the other players, there's no way of coming back and winning.
Hmm.
You're gonna go bankrupt eventually. And so, to bring it back to socialist thinkers and Marxist thinkers, they figured that out like 200 years ago. And they said, okay, this capitalist system is okay, but it's not delivering the promise of liberty and fraternity and equality, because they figured out that the only way, now this is very Marxist thinking, the only way an employee gets paid is if the employer makes money. You do not deserve $20 an hour for a job, or 30, or whatever it is. You get paid the amount of money that still leaves in a profit margin for the employer. So you could be stupid and go to your employer and say, I'm hot as shit. I deserve $75 an hour. And your employer's like, yeah, but I can only bill people $60 an hour. You're fired. It's like because and it's not in a mean way. It's just duh.
Hmm.
It's like obviously they have to make money in order to pay you. So it's that difference between what an employee offers and then what an employer takes. And that's the difference that Marxists talk about. They're very sort of workplace organized thinking than Marxists.
Okay.
But Marxism has got a terrible reputation in the United States. My God.
Yeah. And
Yeah,
then
Marxism has been attached to everything else that people love to hate, whether it be gypsies, brown folk of a variety of brownness,
mm,
Jews. You slap in the Marxist word, you probably heard things like cultural Marxism. It's just a made up term
hmm
to try and lump together. Let's just, if we try and build a movement that wants to cancel out the opinions of pretty much all women and homosexuals and gypsies and Jews and brown people. Let's just all lump it together. Cultural Marxism. Cultural Marxism comes, it comes from the deep internet and those who dwell there.
hmm.
And those who dwell there have gone mainstream. And a lot of these sort of ideas, cultural Marxism, you wouldn't have heard that 40 years ago as like an acceptable thing that be like, it's because people, I know a lot of people that just don't understand
Hmm.
what it actually means, where it actually comes from. And so there are folks like me who've read a lot about these things who will then go, my God, like, you're a Nazi. And then those people who don't know that it actually comes out of Nazi literature, like, why are you calling me a Nazi, man? I'm not a Nazi. You see how this loop goes
Yeah.
crazy?
What's an example of that where someone would ignorantly do something and then be called a Nazi, and then of course that's pretty bad if you're called a Nazi. What's an example of that?
Well, the internet has changed the whole game because people on Twitter can use terms quite um, loosely, even though they don't know the full context of what those terms mean. And in fact, I know that there's a lot of people who will use terms and not know of its either its racist past or whatever past that those terms have associated with it, and they're doing it in an innocent way. But then someone points it out and says, you're a racist or you're a Nazi, and then they're all offended of like, I'm not a Nazi. And in a way, they're like, yeah, I suppose in a way you got to say they're right because inside they don't feel as though they've been racist. Um, and so that now it's being pointed out to them. They're like, hey, I'm not a racist. And it's like, oh God, this problem keeps getting worse. And it makes itself worse because people don't have a fundamental understanding of the origins of words and the origins of language and what they mean. And people like loosely throw them around. And then if someone comes back at you and accuses you of something, let's not make it all the one person's fault. It's also sometimes the accusers are like, oh, like you're just like going way beyond the scope of what is an appropriate
Hmm.
level of accusation to someone. If someone makes, you know, mildly, say, racist statements or just little quips, it's like, if it's coming from someone who's poor and powerless, and they're, it's just kind of a mild jokey place, you're doing more harm by accusing that person of being racist. But when it's someone powerful and they're using it for their advantage, that's the racism that needs to be called out.
Hmm.
This whole call out business that people talk about, we need to call it out. And I'm like, why? Why do you need to call it out? What are you trying to achieve by calling it out?
Hmm.
Are you trying to humiliate that person? And what does that do? It might actually make that person dig in their heels and dislike you more and then become an actual racist.
Yeah, that's a danger. Um, that's pretty intense. Um, wow. I
I
had a
think we all
thought.
just got to be nicer, you know?
Yeah. Or another thing I was thinking about, and this might be um, more of the Jordan Peterson approach, but like, say, for example, someone's like, you said something in your a couple of minutes ago about we all love to hate. Like, Marxism is a word that we love to hate. And it's interesting that that's a thing that people gravitate towards is um, loving to hate something. As you know, like if you look on the internet at different channels that have lots of attention, sometimes there are things that you're like, wow, why do I why am I so attracted to this, or why is this being attracted by so much attention? And it's because people have a desire to dislike something. And I had a thought about, well, maybe, okay, instead of being nice, for example, I do think people should be more nice to each other. A little understanding of each other is really important. But also, I was coming to the idea of like, okay, I enjoy this video of this other person um, getting shut down on the internet, and that's because I feel the pressure in a different area of my life that kind of has nothing to do with that video, but I feel the pressure in another area of my life that is affecting my psyche. And instead of standing up to that pressure in an appropriate way, in a truthful way, in a strong way, I look elsewhere and I'm attracted to the what would be the psychic energy of standing up to that, but seeing it in a film or seeing it on some clickbait on the internet. And this is kind of, I believe, this is more of like a Carl Jung archetypal, like embracing your shadow type of thing. Like, um, again, sorry, a lot of the things that Jordan Peterson talks about is like, um, pay attention to the things that you're attracted to. If you're attracted to uh, devastation and like people getting, I don't know, ripped apart politically, maybe that's because you feel a sense of needing to do that in another area of your life.
Hmm.
What do you make of that? Rather than being nice, for example, to uh, maybe be stronger in other areas.
Okay, well, to put it in my understanding of what we're talking about is the power of otherism, of um, taking some amount of pleasure in trying to figure out the world and blaming a group of others. And so, you know, you see this clickbait on the internet, and it's like, yeah, they're attacking these people, and that it feels like justice. Thank God we're attacking the people that are causing the problem. And so, do we get some sort of pleasure in that? And I admit it all the time that my thinking will roll itself back to find who's at fault, who's at fault, and always sort of like, how is this at fault? And this is very much what makes me a socialist. A socialist is always focused on what is at fault, the systemic problems. It's not who is at fault. It makes every sense in the world when you have a system like we have that someone's going to exploit it to their own advantage. That's what it's designed to do. So it's the system. And if I were that person, I have a very high likelihood of doing the exact same exploitation that they did. So I look to the system. I am a little interested, though, more on this Jungian thought that you mentioned. Maybe you can repeat it again for me, and I can think about that one a little bit more.
Okay. Well, Carl Jung was like a compatriot, if I know what that word is, of Freud. Um, and Freud was interesting, but he was really interested in the unconscious. And he was really interested in sort of the suppression of biological needs, and then that popping out in other areas to satisfy the equilibrium. So it's
Hmm.
like our psyche is always striving for equilibrium. I don't know if I have this completely correct, but we're always striving for equilibrium. And then, say, for example, this is a big thought in terms of sexual repression, that people think that we should be just sexually free, and that should be everything, that should be
Yeah.
completely natural and non-taboo. So when people started being like, okay, we should clothe ourselves, we should not have intercourse with more than one person. Um, that the continuation of that growing into clothing yourself to make sure you're not looking promiscuous and things like that, you're actually suppressing the sexual desires, and then those desires pop up in different ways that are unhealthy, for example,
Okay.
or aggression, um, as well.
I think what we're talking about is coming to grips with the fact that humanity, um, we're monkeys, and we forget that part.
Mm,
That we are a very complex set of inputs and outputs and stimuli to try and handle the world. And because we have these brains that are, I don't know, more conscious than the other animal species we've encountered, but in particular, we're able to write things down
mm,
and gather up this vast array of knowledge, forgetting that the moments that really impact us are actually emotional. Um,
emotional.
we
Mm,
can intellectualize our lives till we're blue in the face. It doesn't change the fact that in the morning I have to take a shit, and at night I have to go to bed, and eventually I'm gonna die because I'm an animal,
mm,
and we forget about that part.
mm.
Um, yeah, I don't know how else to say that, but there is something to be said of these desires inside of us that we're our system probably does have a certain amount of trying to balance things out and make it manageable.
Hmm.
And there's even some evidence that actually other animal species do the same thing. Interesting facts about depression, that there are many animal species that we suspect um, experience something very similar to depression. You'll see it often in the wild. An animal, say, is lightly wounded or something like that, and so they will go cower. But they go cower in a place of shelter, sometimes for much longer than what the physical wound actually requires to get better. But they're feeling insecure, and in fact, they're feeling a little bit depressed, and so they're like, ooh, I just want to stay in bed just a little bit longer to
Mm-hmm.
make sure I'm safe. And so we think of human depression, we think of it as this awful thing, and it is. But we fail to see that maybe it has a certain utility as well. Is that the inputs that have come in to that person have led them to feel as though like depression is actually protecting them from being hurt even further.
Yeah, absolutely. I would say that that's like an evolutionary perspective on psychology, the evolutionary perspective on human psychology,
Yeah.
and I really like looking at the mind from that perspective because it kind of tells you of a why. You know, it's like
Yeah.
you're you're hiding in a tree, um, and you're wounded, and all you want to do is sleep and not go out, and you're afraid to go out, and you're feeling insecure and all this stuff. And what could have happened, for example, is that you had an encounter with another animal and you lost that battle. You have a wound, and what's happening is that your serotonin levels have dropped because you've now been pinned down the hierarchy, the animal kingdom hierarchy. And your serotonin levels are dropping, your dopamine levels are dropping, your baseline levels are dropping. And to like recover, you need to hibernate. And that's a defense mechanism. I love to look at depression and human psychology
Mm-hmm.
from that perspective.
And you're making me think that we probably, in general, underestimate the amount of impact we have on each other. When you mentioned the the rungs or the pegs or something, that you've moved down the ladder because of your serotonin levels and all that. It's like, yeah, on a day-to-day basis, human beings have an impact on each other, and they hurt each other in ways that sometimes even the person who's being hurt doesn't actually even realize they're being hurt by this process.
Mm.
So once again, systemic thinking, like a socialist would say, well, if you're chronically underpaying your workers for a task, they may not on a daily basis go home and go, oh, fuck, my job sucks. But over time, they're getting a tiny bit, tiny bit, tiny bit, tiny bit, tiny bit, tiny bit more pissed off with their
Mm.
job. And eventually that becomes a massive problem, either even just from a, making money perspective, that, all of your employees will revolt against you because you've been a jackass all this time,
Mm-hmm.
and no one's come forward to say,
Well, from that perspective, I kind of like the idea of a free market or capitalist society because it says those who will succeed are the people who have the greatest, or like a company that will succeed has the greatest organization. So, what do you think of this idea where, um, in order to make sure your employees are being satisfied and that they're like the foundation of your company, to make sure that you push them like a team. Like for example, at the company that I work with, we don't hold. Now I know language does make a difference, make a big difference, but at the same time, language also can also not make a big difference. But instead of saying that we have a company meeting, we'll say we have a team meeting. So using the word team and promoting that kind of, I know, words don't matter unless the actions follow at the same time, but um, where you have the cultural, I think this is because I love keeping my ear to the ground in regards to entrepreneurial. Because I don't know. I think that's probably in my blood, in our blood. But
Yeah, definitely.
I love, and actually, entrepreneurial people are often higher in the creative personality traits too. So that's maybe you and I are maybe that's where we get it from too. But um, well, what was I going to say about?
Something about team meetings.
Yeah, yeah. So the the one that's the most honest, the company that's the most honest, the most um, building up of the players on their team, their tribe, their culture, or whatever, and that's becoming big, especially in places like California, where they want to promote a good culture, a company culture. Um, yeah, what do you make of that?
Absolutely. There's definitely a few examples where company executives have put a lot more emphasis on cooperation and sharing of responsibilities and ideas. But you did sort of allude to it as well earlier that words sometimes don't satisfy everything, and if you were to talk about actual shared ownership, then you're actually having the true experiment. Because the other thing that's really interesting about capitalism is if you dig deeper, you always find really interesting stories. And you'll find a lot of, say, tech companies are doing this. They are making a more, equalized workplace for their core workers. And that's sort of the key concept here, is that they'll have this group of people that it represents this company. And yeah, they do a lot of shared decision making. However, what used to be part of the company, like the warehouse and the guys who deliver the shit, and the guys that come in the night and clean the place, they're no longer part of the company. They're part of another company. And those, they're contracted out. So, yes, we've created this
Ah,
idyllic world for the people that would have been at the top of the company anyways. And then everything else has been contracted out to the non-important people, which is
ah,
interesting because, right now we're finding out that these us non-important people are now the essential people, the guys who drive the trucks, the
yeah,
people who pick the food and package the food and are at the grocery store are the essential workers. They
yeah.
always have been. And
Hmm.
so now is a really interesting time to be alive, to see all these abstractions in our world, and what merit what merits do people bring to the table? Because that is the biggest complication with capitalism. It is always trying to sell you the idea that is a merit-based system, and that's just simply not true. If I start out with $10 million, I could literally do nothing. I could literally be a douchebag my whole life and get paid just by just getting paid interest and live off of it. So
Mm.
how is that a meritorious society when you start at a starting line and then you're just like it's just given to you?
Yeah.
And over again, um, we see what's actually happening is we're rewarding some of the most shameless behaviors. The more vitriol you put out there, the more you clickbait in this world, the more you put a bunch of hateful, crazy material out there. How do you explain a guy like Alex Jones? He's a madman. Now, he started out basic, he was just a performer at the beginning. He was just a comedian. Now I think he's gone just completely off the deep end. But we're talking about just he went way over the top and then started getting rewarded for it. How is that necessarily a meritorious society? It's like, what did he merit?
So
Well,
who
I guess he invented craziness. I don't know. But maybe I've gone off topic a little bit.
Well, I've never heard of Alex Jones.
Oh my God, you've never heard of Alex
I
Jones?
know I live under a rock often.
That's
Maybe I live
no,
in
it's
an echo chamber.
awesome
Maybe.
that you don't know Alex Jones. Alex Jones is like the king of conspiracy theory madness. He started this thing called InfoWars. And
Oh.
yeah, he's been banned from everything 1,000 times. Like he's always getting in trouble. And like recently, he's driving around in a tank at one of these Liberate America protests, and he's got like a bullhorn. I don't know what they call him, like a screaming horn. He's like
Okay.
rallying people up, and he's a provocateur, is what he is. In the old days, he's a bard. He's a noisemaker, and we reward the noisemakers right now.
Hmm.
But
Hmm. So
the thing I perhaps was hoping to highlight, and I'll do it now, is